life. But I'm really here just to introduce some of our great speakers for today. First, I'm going to introduce Bill Sweeney, who is one of the co-founders of the National Vehicle Residency Collective. He has been instrumental in planning of the National Vehicle Residency Summit. I will let you hear from him more about the work that he's done on issues of vehicle residency and homelessness, because his resume is impressive and long. But I'll very quickly mention our other wonderful panelists. You will also hear from John Threlkeld, who is Senior Congressional Manager of the National Alliance to End Homelessness, Nantia Ruwan, who is a professor of law at the University of Denver's Sturm College of Law, and Ali Bilo, who is an attorney with Columbia Legal Services in Washington State. I will go ahead and put myself on mute, and I will turn it over to Bill.
Thank you, Tristia. Those were kind words. I'm Bill Sweeney, and for those of you who may not see me clearly, I'm an old guy with a white beard and a black hoodie. I go by the pronouns he and him, and I'm pleased to be here today. I was one of the co-founders of Colorado Safe Parking about, well, it's going on 4 years now. And we now offer, we have constructed a network of about 12 parking lots with 140 to 150 slots available every night. We are full. And while that may sound like something, it's a drop in the bucket. I work in the Denver metro area, and those 7 counties in that continuum of care in that metro area are certain that there are probably around 1,500 people living in vehicles, but there's more likelihood that the number is around 2,000 or 2,500. So there's nothing we can do except press forward as fast as we can to do as much as we can to try to continue to help people. I've worked with a couple of the other panelists on some of the projects that have been part of that. John Threlkeld and I have done a little bit of work together, and he'll be talking about that. Nantia Ruwan and I have done some work together, and he'll be talking about that. So other than that, I would say that the most interesting thing that we found is that because there is so much need, and because we aren't tied into the idea of having a huge capital investment in a fixed wall structure, we are able to really talk about how can we shape yet another small program or medium program to meet yet another need. And so we do not have uniformity across our system. And we don't plan to have uniformity, and we move the programs along in their formats as best we can to meet needs as we see them emerge or as we begin to understand them. So a lot of our work is being in touch with those that we aren't serving and being in touch with those that we are serving to see how we can serve better. Tristia, I don't have more than that unless you have something specific.
No, I think that's great opening framing. We're going to turn it over to John Threlkeld, who, as I mentioned, is a senior congressional manager at the National Alliance to End Homelessness. And John is going to talk to us about the Naomi Schwartz bill, which is struggling in Congress, even though it is really the first ever bill that would provide some dedicated relief to vehicle residents. He'll describe the bill to us, but also what we can do, especially as a community, a growing collective of people, to get the attention of federal lawmakers that vehicle residents need and deserve. Thank you, John.
Oh, thank you. And thank you so much for organizing this event. Every time I talk to people in the field about safe parking and vehicular homelessness, I learn how much I have to learn. But I'm John, I'm he, him. I'm an elderly, perhaps doddering white male wearing a shirt and tie because that's how we roll in Washington. And now I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Maybe I'm not going to be able to. Huh? Anyway, I'll forge ahead. I'm experiencing some technical difficulties myself, but I can provide.
Let me see if I might be able to fix that, John.
Sure.
Or Marika, if you're online, can we make sure to give John?
And I'd be happy to provide. I'll be happy to provide slides afterwards.
We want to make sure everybody has a chance to see what you.
Sure. It's not the most exciting presentation, so it's easier to follow if you have slides.
I have a copy of your presentation from a couple of days ago, John. And
Yeah,
I do have share capabilities showing. So if nothing else works, perhaps we can do that.
Yeah, you should be able to click share screen.
Is that working for you, John? If it's not,
no, it's not. I'm not sure why. It worked earlier because I tested it. I'm so embarrassed.
There's no.
The last guy had to just do it twice and it worked.
No, it's.
And I'm not having good luck finding your.
Do you see share content next to your video or your mute button?
Yes.
Okay, to click on that and it should say screen. There you go.
That worked finally. I apologize for holding things up. Thank you so much. Well, I'm living up to my reputation of being an elderly, technophobic Luddite. So let's go to the, I'm here to talk about the Naomi Schwartz Safe Parking Program. And to save you from asking the question, she was a champion for safe parking in Santa Barbara County when the first safe parking program was opened in 2004. And this legislation was introduced by Salud Carbajal, who was a representative from California from that area. And the legislation, and I'm using would have that tense because the legislation, although it certainly didn't do as much as we wanted, was ultimately unsuccessful. But the legislation would have established a $125 million grant program over 5 years in the Department of Housing and Urban Development to promote safe parking programs. And, it was designed so as not to require uniformity and to, try to encourage, different approaches, not necessarily the same approaches everywhere. It would have allowed funds for the following activities: establishing and operating a program, providing permanent rehousing assistance, supporting safety and health, and monitoring the shelter. Would have supported hygiene facilities and restrooms, maintaining vehicles and providing gas. And of course, the all-important entering data and information in hummus. In terms of eligible grantees, again, I think they wanted to encourage as much participation as possible. A unit of local government, a tribe, a nonprofit that serves the homeless, or something, the COC entity. The legislation ultimately generated 34 co-sponsors, which is a lot, for legislation, which quite frankly, in the great scheme of things, is not that significant. We did have one Republican, Doug LaMalfa. Some of you may recognize him because he represents a district in Northern California, which has experienced a lot of vehicular homelessness. Unfortunately, he was the only Republican to support the legislation, which was sort of a tip as to what's, that it wouldn't advance as far as we'd like. There was a significant delay in markup, that is to say, formal consideration by the Committee of Jurisdiction, which in this case was the House Committee on Financial Services, chaired by Representative Maxine Waters, the Democrat from Los Angeles, California. So this legislation was introduced in May of 2021. It didn't get marked up meaning formally considered by the Committee of Jurisdiction until July of 2022. And the delay was in part because of the lack of Republican support. And then the fact that the sponsor, Representative Carbajal, was not a member of the Committee of Jurisdiction. Chairwoman Waters, like all chairs, favors legislation that's sponsored by members of her committee. That's how they stay chairs. Prior to the markup, the bill was substantially revised in large part to address Republican concerns about costs. The revised bill that was ultimately considered at the markup would have allowed for Emergency Solutions Grants Funds, ESG, to be used for maintenance, operation, insurance, and provision of utilities related to safe parking. And ESG funds are appropriated every year in the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Appropriations Bill. The new bill, the revised bill, would have defined safe parking programs as those which provide homeless persons living in vehicles, including motorhomes, with a safe place to park their vehicles overnight to facilitate a transition to more stable housing and provide rehousing services and essential services. So again, try to keep it general. The advantage of using ESG in this case is that we would be using existing funds. We wouldn't be drawing on additional funds. It wouldn't be the $125 million that we had asked for earlier for HUD to use as part of a grant program. Instead, we'd be using existing funds. And the idea was, well, our Republican friends wouldn't object because we weren't, placing any additional demands on taxpayers. Now, ESG is used for other purposes, everything from shelters to temporary housing to outreach. And for the whole country, it's $290 million per year. And that sum has not increased in several years. And of course, as we all know, in government, no growth is the same as a cut, given increased costs. Nevertheless, several safe parking programs that we work with, including Bill's, preferred this version because, they were more confident in getting funding from state and local governments that receive the ESG grants than they were from HUD, which I think many regard as, somewhat ambivalent about safe parking. The Financial Services Committee, Republicans, unfortunately, were not appeased by eliminating all costs. And the legislation was approved 28-22, but along partisan lines, which is to say, all the Democrats voted for the new version of the legislation and all the Republicans were opposed. Why is that? Well, I can send you the videotape and you can look at the debate yourself. It's not an edifying experience. But it's safe to say the House Financial Services Committee is very partisan. And so anything which the Democrats propose is automatically rejected by Republicans and sort of vice versa. So the fact that this was a Democrats only or almost only bill, didn't help ingratiate it with Republicans. Homelessness itself is very partisan in the committee because of the objection of some Republicans to housing first. They literally use every piece of homelessness legislation that comes up as an opportunity to fight about housing first. So that made for a sometimes unpleasant debate. I would say the bill also provided an opportunity for certain members of the committee to dump on California, to dump on the Democratic left coast. There's an intense association among some lawmakers with safe parking with California and with the West Coast. I don't think they appreciate the extent to which other parts of the country are experiencing vehicular homelessness and the appeal that safe parking lots have. If I had to summarize the debate, and again, you're welcome to watch it on your own, I would say that opponents insisted that the federal government should not support safe parking operations, that we get what we subsidize, that safe parking operations cost too much. That was based on an experience in Los Angeles, that it's cruel, and this is a quote, it's cruel to encourage people to sleep in their cars, and that such programs don't provide services or help people escape homelessness. So clearly, we have a lot of educating to do, at least on that committee, and I'm not optimistic about, this sort of legislation's prospects in the upcoming Congress, given the change in the House. Now, ultimately, with respect to this year's bill, the House Financial Services Committee's leadership or the House Democratic leadership made the decision not to send the legislation to the floor for a vote for the entire House, even though it was approved by the Committee of Jurisdiction. You're probably wondering, well, what about the Senate? Well,
Nope, it looks like you just muted, John.
oh, I'm
There you
sorry.
go. Now you're back.
Am I back on? The original legislation was included in a larger aspirational housing and homelessness bill, and aspirational in Washington is sort of code for too costly and controversial. You know, hey, it'd be nice, but it's too much and it's too big and it costs too much. It's part of Senator Padilla's bill, but that legislation isn't moving. Now, I should say, with the critical assistance of several great parking programs, including bills, you know, we've been lobbying senators from Colorado, Oregon, California, Washington in hopes of moving some version of the ESG bill in the next Congress. I think it's safe to say that our Democratic friends, you know, in a narrowly divided Senate, are eager to see a Republican come forward. So I'm trying to make friends with safe parking operations in red states, or at least states which are represented by one Republican. Love to work with you if you're out there. Well, you know, we're going to continue working. I'm not going to say that, you know, all my colleagues support this legislation. You know, there is some concern that, you know, this legislation helps communities segregate people who are vehicularly homeless, and that, you know, that these facilities are more encampments than they are shelters. But, you know, our policy, and one that I'm eager to carry out, is one of support for this legislation. One, you know, again, it's no cost. So, you know, I think we're going to continue to try to work with Republicans, because this approach emphasizes local discretion. You know, if you don't believe in safe parking, you don't have to fund it. If you don't have a vehicular homelessness problem, then you don't have to fund it. So, you know, local control is a Republican virtue. So we're going to continue to emphasize that. You know, we think these programs are popular based on the people I've talked to. You know, because they're popular with the vehicularly homeless because they provide safe places to sleep without harassment, you know, by the usual suspects, police, homeowners, and predators. And these programs help to connect people with services that could result in permanent housing. We think they're also popular with communities because they get the vehicularly homeless cars off the streets, reduce crime against the vehicularly homeless. And so these programs, you know, also reduce law enforcement costs and, you know, general NIMBY anxiety. And then the additional reasons, you know, there are some areas, particularly rural areas, where there aren't shelters, and there's not really a good economic case to be made for building traditional brick and mortar shelters. And so, you know, these sorts of facilities can operate as a low-cost alternative in rural areas. You know, I think hopefully it would appeal to Democrats and Republicans that, you know, houses of worship are extensively involved in this, and, you know, faith-based groups, because they're the first to volunteer their parking lots. And you know, we think in a lot of, perhaps not all, but in a lot of the safe parking operations that I've encountered, you know, there's a large contingent of working homeless people who need their vehicles to continue to work or to find work. And I think this subpopulation would certainly appeal to Republicans as well as Democrats. So again, if you're interested in federal legislation to promote safe parking programs, we'd certainly be eager to work with you. And I should have identified my employer at the beginning. National Alliance to End Homelessness is a nonprofit think tank based in Washington, D.C. We work with people experiencing homelessness, as well as providers of services to people experiencing homelessness, and federal, state, and local governments to come up with policies, procedures, practices which would reduce homelessness and popularize the ones that work, like safe parking. Et voila.
Thank you very much, John. And please note that John's email address is on the screen. I know that that was asked for in the chat. A couple things that I'll just mention before we kick it over to our next presenter. One, we had over 500 and I think it was over 570 people who registered for this conference. There's a map that was put together by our own Jay Coster, who has been another co-founding member of the collective, amazing support and worker on the Summit Planning Committee. He has helped put together a visual map that shows where all of the registrants are in from, and it shows the national nature of the interest in this issue. And you'll be able to see, you know, those red states where we've got participants who are here or have expressed interest in this summit. One thing to
That
note,
sounds like an invaluable tool to share with people on the Hill, particularly our Republican friends. That's great. Thank you.
wonderful. And I note this in part to say, collective, you know, this is your community. This is the first event that we've had. You've heard from John that there needs to be more material that he can work with to show that this is a population of people that does need federal policymakers to pay attention to and to enact policies that are really going to help. You know, the Naomi Schwartz bill would provide overnight safe parking. There are a lot of overnight safe parking providers who are on this call. We know that that does serve a population. But there's also been calls, even just in the chat today, and certainly in the work that we do, for longer term, affordable, long-term parking options for people living in vehicles. And, you know, that is the type of policies that people like John can work on if we provide him with the information that he needs. I see a request for the map. I don't know, Jake, if you're able to put that in, but just flagging that working together, we are far more likely to get the policies that we need in place. There's the federal policymaking apparatus, which is critical for all of us. But there are also state policies that can be enacted, and we wanted to flag some of those for you as well. Colorado has been one of the leaders in this area, and we have Nantia Ruwan, professor of law at University of Denver, who can tell us about Colorado's new towing bill, HB 22-1314. I'll put that in the chat. And the state policy recommendations from the report that she put together, Shifting Gears. Take it away, Nantia.
Thanks, Tristia. Thanks to everyone here. And I just wanted to mention for those who don't use Zoom every day like I do, if you go to view in your top right corner and do view out of gallery, instead click on speaker, you don't have to say like, oh, I'm the person wearing this. You can just see this one who's speaking and the spotlight will go to them. So in case you're just looking at 100 boxes, if you want to go to view and hit speaker, you'll actually see me. And since I don't have a PowerPoint up, and I'm not going to use a PowerPoint, I'm just going to use a few minutes to talk about something that is actually a bright light in our advocacy here. So it was actually heartening to hear Tristia say that Colorado is a leader in something that's good for unhoused individuals, because Bill and other of us who are from Colorado sometimes feel like that isn't true. I met Tristia the first time, I think 6 years ago, when we were trying to get past the homeless bill of rights in Colorado legislature and getting it out of a House committee. It took 4 years, and we were denied every year. And then, you know, more recently, the statewide initiative for homeless bill of rights was denied in Colorado. But then we have this really bright light, which I hadn't been paying much attention to, because this is not something like a statewide sort of homeless bill of rights. It's very particular, but very, I think, helpful for this exact community, which is about predatory towing. And the idea of predatory towing is, I don't need to sort of tell you, you could probably tell me more about it, is this idea that, you know, these towing companies make a lot of money from people who with their cars can be on private property that they believe doesn't have permission to be on that private property. So they can come in the middle of the night, they could go without permission, they take your car, and it takes hundreds and hundreds of dollars to get your car back. And that, of course, impacts those who have living out of the car most especially. So the bill that I put in the chat here passed in Colorado and was signed by our governor and was put into place in August of this year, so just a couple months ago. And so the idea here is that this Vehicle Owners Bill of Rights, it's more formally called the Towing Carrier Non-Consensual Tow Act, effective August 9th of 2022, clarifies and strengthens the state's existing requirements that companies give certain notifications prior to towing a vehicle on private property. So I think the way that it passed, sort of to get to our last speaker's point of like, how do you get something like this passed? We do have a Democratic governor. We do have a Democratic state legislature. And I think it was posed in this way of like, this is not just about unhoused individuals. This is actually about, a lot of other people who have had these towing companies that are doing these things that, that we can all agree are unfair and unwise and cost a lot of money. So I think it gathered support in that way. I'll just mention a couple of the most, I think, key parts of this bill that I think would be great to see in other states. A vehicle return fee capped at $60. So if the tow company has your car, they have to return it if you're able to pay 15% of the total fees you're owed, capped at $60. So after taking your vehicle without your consent, after this non-consensual tow, if you're able to come up with $60, then you get your car back with a promise to pay the other fees or to fight them. So I think that's really important, right? You get your car back, which is so important for people. So the other big piece of this is that towers must be given a 1-day notice. So carriers must give written notice 24 hours before removing a vehicle from a common parking area of an apartment complex, a mobile home, a cooperative, a condominium complex. They have to get permission from the property owner in order to execute that tow. So I think that's certainly important as well. So I'm just going to list off some of the things that I think are important, and more of this, if you Google it, you can find the whole list. But what towers must do before taking your car, in addition to that 24-hour notice, they have to actually make sure that the property owner has provided adequate signage of the regulations and restrictions about vehicles and towing. They cannot tow your vehicle from private property if the registration on the rear license plate has expired. So that had been a thing, like your tags, you didn't get the tag on there quick enough, or your registration had lapsed for a few months. They can't tow it just because of that tag. The carrier must take multiple photos of your vehicle to document its condition. I think that's important. They have to release your vehicle back to you if they approach the car while it's on the tow. So how many of you have had stories where your car is on the tow, you race up and say, "Hey, I'm here, give me my car." They say, "Sorry, it's on the tow truck," and they take it, right? This will say you actually have to give it back to you if you're there, which I think is very important. So let me go quickly to what non-consensual towers must do after taking your car. So along with the getting it back for a cap of $60, you are allowed to retrieve the contents inside your vehicle without a fee. They must provide you with an itemized bill showing each charge and rate that was incurred. They have to accept cash and major credit cards as defined by this regulation and by the commission, the Public Utilities Commission as well. They have to post a sign at the storage location stating the name, telephone number, and hours of operation, and so on. So all of this, I think, is important. It is a Bill of Rights. It's something that is really helpful for people in this area that I think was not exactly specified in the law previous to this. One thing that I think is important in terms of a policy point beyond these sort of nitpicky things that are very helpful but very specific is that the last line of the bill says, "It is a deceptive trade practice to violate the provisions of the bill, and the Attorney General is responsible for enforcement." It creates an Office of Tow Hearings so that the Public Utilities Commission actually has a new office. It created $100,000 to actually have this new office, such that if a towing company fails to follow the rules, the vehicle owner can file a complaint with this office and have your towing fees waived. So that's certainly important because now there's a dedicated office to this. There's supposed to be an administrative law judge that has hearings on this. And I think that's an important piece of the pie with regard to this bill. So I think I have just a couple more minutes. Tristia asked me to also touch on some of the policy changes that the Denver University law students and I, with Bill's oversight and others, sort of gave us recommendations for how to make the laws better in these areas for people who are living in their cars. With regard to ordinances that prohibit parking of large vehicles such as RVs, we say you should take a look at cities that actually changed their restriction limitation during COVID. They were able to do it during COVID, so it means they should be able to do it going forward. And so taking a look at something like Oakland, California, where in 2020, they enacted an ordinance that authorized RVs to be on vacant property that is located within a zoning district that permits residential activities. That's a big change. You know, the mayor, when that was enacted, is quoted as saying, "We do not find it acceptable for people to use our sidewalk or as trash cans or put human raw waste into our storm drain systems. However, we cannot afford to just push this problem somewhere else. We wanted to be compassionate and address it." And that's what they did. So taking a look at cities who actually were able to make these changes and making arguments for why other cities can do it as well. With regarding to impounding abandoned vehicles, cities have the opportunity to remove language that creates blanket prohibitions against parking abandoned or inoperable vehicles anywhere in city limits. Instead, municipalities can use permissive language to allow inoperable but occupied vehicles to reside in designated areas within the city. And we give some potential language for that for cities who want to advocate, or advocates who want to advocate before city councils for that type of change. With regard to prohibited street parking, where it says there's 24 to 72-hour restrictions, there can be sort of aid to a neighbor living in their car by offering them a place to park in front of their house or access to internet and things like that. But the cities themselves can actually easily remove 72-hour parking restrictions in neighborhoods where businesses are not prevalent or parking turnover is not necessary. And so advocates that can work with cities, as the Colorado Safe Parking Initiative has, and others, to actually work with cities to actually have more permissive ordinances that don't make those cities actually ticket on a routine basis, and then that feeds into the criminalization of homelessness. We have some information, and I'll put the policy report that this language comes in that I did in the breakout session last hour. If you were in the other session and don't have it, I'll put it in this chat so you have the link for the policy report and you can see that language yourself. Lastly, with regard to prohibiting sleeping in cars, that is, like the previous speaker said, more challenging to do on a statewide basis, but city councils can actually read an ordinance's definitions and remove language that blocks creative private solutions to homelessness and houselessness. So the idea here, like for example, if Breckenridge simply removed motor vehicle from their definitions, then private landowners could actually open their land to vehicle residents for a safe place to sleep. So there's small changes like that could have bigger implications, but I think with the right advocacy, that change could happen in these city councils. So with that, I'll turn it over to the next speaker. I will put the policy report with some of that language in the chat. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Nantia. We appreciate all the information that you have given us in your presentation and also in the chat. Some really great questions in the chat. Just as a quick reminder, we're in the last half hour of the first day of the summit. We want to reflect just how much we value this large, diverse community. We hope that you enjoyed today's content. We are looking forward to tomorrow. We're not wrapping up quite yet, but I just wanted to say that because I've got the warm fuzzies. Y'all are giving me the warm fuzzies, and I just want to let you all know that you are appreciated, you're valued, and this is a community that is here for you. We are going to move on to the person who will be our last speaker of the day. And then after Ali Bilo, great attorney, awesome advocate at Columbia Legal Services in Washington, gives a presentation. We will wrap up with some housekeeping items to get us all ready for tomorrow. And with that, take it away, Ali.
Hey everyone, it's wonderful to be here on Zoom and connect with you all living in vehicles, your communities, service providers, other legal aid folks, everyone here. I'm certainly learning a lot today and looking forward to tomorrow too. So yeah, my name's Ali, she, her pronouns. I'm a staff attorney at Columbia Legal Services in Washington State. We're a nonprofit legal services and legal impact organization. We focus primarily on systemic change, and we work with people impacted by unjust practices, poverty, and racial injustice. I'm not a vehicle resident, but I've been really honored to do legal work for and with lower income vehicle residents in different ways for the past 6 or so years. I'm very excited to talk to you all today about a case I participated in as an attorney called City of Seattle versus Stephen Long. A Washington State Supreme Court decision came out in the case 2021, I believe it was August. And I have a few slides, just 3. I'm going to try to share them. If it doesn't work, that's totally okay. Just a couple pictures and things. Can people see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So yeah, I'd be remiss if I first didn't mention that a lot of other people worked on this case. I'm not sure who is all here on Zoom. I know a few people may be attending, but Anne, Yuri, Cheryl, Debbie, an excellent civil rights attorney, Jim Lobsons, was also co-counsel on the case. And we also got support from many other organizations and nonprofit partners, vehicle residents who talked with us through issues, service providers, a lot of people. It was very much a group effort. But it was really a group effort that, not to state the obvious, but started with Mr. Stephen Long, who's pictured there in the middle of this picture. He is a vehicle resident. I'm not sure if he's here on the Zoom today or if he could make it or not, but he, bravely stood up for himself, walked into a law office for help, had self-represented himself in one impound hearing, and really was able to articulate what was wrong with how he was treated in the Seattle tow and impound process, and go and get legal help and rally other people around him to try to change tow policies in Washington state. And that's why I put these quotes on the slide from him about why he participated in this case that took about 5 years through basically all the levels of the court system in Washington that it could go through. Instead of delving into a lot of the legal technicalities, because there's a lot of legal technicalities in this case, I kind of just like to tell the story best I can of how the case started, what ultimately happened, and what's happening now in Washington with policy efforts. And so the case began kind of back in 2016, and Stephen had been living in his truck for about 2 years. Rent costs had been going up in Seattle back then, as they still are today. Lack of affordable housing for many, many people. And Stephen couldn't afford to live in his apartment anymore. And he had to do what a lot of people do in Washington, some by choice that a lot of people have mentioned because they would like to be mobile and live in a vehicle, and some because it's their only option. And Stephen moved into the property he owned, which was his truck. And, he was moving from place to place for a while, but like Dr. Press and others have mentioned, in Seattle, there's a 72-hour rule where in a lot of areas of public property, you can only be parked for 72 hours, and then you have to move along to another area or down the block. And it's kind of in confluence with a lot of other parking rules that makes it hard to find a place to park. So Stephen was working and moving from place to place, but his truck was older and something went wrong with a part in it, and it was estimated that it would be about $1,000 to fix. So he kind of moved along and eventually settled in this place out of the way. But there was an incident down the road that was not associated with him, and police got called to an encampment. Stephen wasn't doing anything wrong. He told the police and tow officer, "Hey, I live here. I've got a broken down truck." But they told him to move along, and if he didn't, they would impound it. And he waited. They didn't tow it for a few days. So, he left to go to work on this really poor weather, stormy day, thinking it might be safe. He went to go work at a stadium, came back in the middle of the night, and his home was gone and impounded. Super upsetting, had to call 911 to figure out where it was. It was his home. So all of his belongings, his winter coat, were gone, and he had to sleep on the ground that night, ended up getting sick. He didn't have the things that he needed for work the remainder of the week. Really tough situation. And when he went to the tow yard, the way it generally works in Washington law, or did at the time, is you have to pay the full tow costs to get your vehicle back. For some people who live in their vehicles, that might not be a problem. But for other people like Stephen, who are lower income, that might mean your truck gets sold to pay off those tow expenses if you can't afford them. And he couldn't afford the over $500 cost to impound. So he went to a tow hearing, eventually got some further legal help. At his initial hearing, the tow magistrate told him you can go on a $50 a month payment plan. And that was basically the only option he was given to avoid sale of his home. So, and that, I'm going to go to another slide if I can. That sort of brought us to, this seemed wrong, that it's not just a vehicle, it's someone's housing. And they're stuck without it sometimes for weeks. You don't have your belongings. You're basically being evicted from your home for a really really minor parking infraction. That was a lot of why Stephen went to get more legal help, because it seemed wrong. And I remember as a fairly new lawyer looking at the local and state laws and thinking in this kind of stiff logical way, well, the city law says this can be done, it seems wrong, but are we stuck here? Do we have to go lobby to get the laws changed, or are there other legal arguments? And ultimately, we made a few different arguments in the case, some of which that were successful in the state Supreme Court. The first one being that these fines are just really, really excessive under the excessive fines clause of the Constitution. And the state Supreme Court ultimately agreed with this one and said that governments have to consider someone's ability to pay in proportionality when they assess fines, and that it was simply not proportional to charge someone that much money and impound their vehicle for such a minor parking infraction and not consider the effect it had on him. Another argument in the case was the Homestead Act. This is the argument that I had argued at a few different levels of the courts. And this is a particular state law argument for Washington, but I think it's important to bring up for people who are in other states too, whether you're a vehicle resident yourself, a legal aid advocate, or anyone really, because a lot of states have their own homestead acts, their debt protection laws that basically say, except for certain debts, your home can't be sold, or certain actions can't be taken against it to pay off your debts. And we brought up that argument in court and then lucked out with some legislative history where we found out that Washington state specifically added personal property to the Homestead Act to protect people living in boats and cars back in the 1990s. And so the Supreme Court partially agreed with us and said that, yes, vehicles can automatically be homes. They ultimately said through some technicalities that Stephen's homestead defense was premature, because at the stage we brought it, he had got his home back, he had been on a payment plan. But the court's decision certainly raised the question of other people who are facing immediate sale of their home that are in this process should be able to stop it through this Homestead Act argument. We raised some other arguments at different levels, some of which were dropped. I'll just briefly mention Article 1, Section 7 of the Washington State Constitution, which is the state's Fourth Amendment corollary about seizing vehicles, ultimately weren't successful for technical reasons. And then we did have another argument in the case that we ultimately dropped. So we ended up ultimately, through Stephen really fighting for 5 years and standing up for his rights, getting a good decision. But it left kind of a lot of uncertainty, because there's existing state law that says you have to pay your impound costs before getting your vehicle back. And that's somewhat now in conflict with the excessive fines clause. And then in state law, it does still say vehicles can automatically be sold. But what the court said about the Homestead Act brings that into question. If someone goes to a tow yard and says, I can't afford this, and this is my home, you cannot sell it to pay the impound costs. So what the legislature decided to do was they convened a work group. And this is my last slide. It's very text heavy, which is not a great last slide. But this was the language of what the legislative work group decided. They set aside funding to convene a work group of a bunch of different people, vehicle resident advocates, nonprofit legal services organizations, ultimately just one or so people from each group, a fairly small group. But we have been meeting regularly for the last few months. I'm lucky to be on the work group. Dr. Grant Press is also on the work group, as are other representatives. And we've been meeting regularly, trying to come to an agreement about what recommendations can be made to the legislature. And a report is coming out on December 1st in a short couple weeks. And then from there, it will be up to the legislature and other lobbying groups to decide what changes will be made to the impound laws. I think there will possibly be some really good policy fixes. There's obviously people that come from different perspectives in the group. I think as the legal services representative and the vehicle resident advocates would like it to be broader changes to ensure people have safe places to park, and then people on the other end try to make things narrow at times. So it's been kind of a lot of back and forth discussion. I won't delve into it super in depth because I know I'm about at time, and I'm just one voice on the work group, and the report will be coming out on December 1st. But I think it's, you know, an example of how a lot of different tools can be used, whether that's lawsuits with lobbying or like writing recommendations to the legislature. And this work group had people from a variety of areas involved. And I'm really hoping that we can, you know, work through those different perspectives and try to get something positive out of that work group. And I think it's, you know, so important now more than ever, as a lot of people have brought up, there's increasing criminalization happening in Washington. There's increasing restrictive parking laws. So it's been super great to meet all of you over Zoom and talk to you all and learn a lot. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak today.
Can I add one quick thing on that, Tristia? Just so that everybody knows that one of the first things that we did when we joined that group too was to say that we need people with lived experience on that group, and that was one of the things that we advocated for, and it was taken not only into consideration but accepted. And we brought in a person who's I don't think they're attending here today, but I don't want to out them, but they were able to join, and they're not only do they have years of experience living in a vehicle, but also as an outreach provider and working to help people work through the criminal justice systems in regarding towing and impound.
Thank you very much. You know, one thing I'll just mention is I'll put a link in the chat to, you know, other bills, and in particular, this one in California. This is California Assembly Bill 1685, which passed through the legislature but was vetoed by Governor Newsom, that would have provided some relief from ticketing when the Department of Motor Vehicles intended to put a hold on people's vehicles who could demonstrate their unhoused status. You know, as I said, it's a vehicle that did pass through the legislature. There are parts of it that might be useful as you think about your own policy advocacy, and a link to that bill will be in the chat. You know, we have about 11 minutes to go before the end of day one of the summit, and I am just about able to pull up the image that I mentioned earlier.
I have it as well. I can show it right now if you'd like.
The most recent one that Jake sent?
I do, yeah.
So this is amazing, folks. I just want to say something really quickly before sending it over to Graham to close us out. One, we had 643 registrants for today. This effort is an all volunteer effort. There has been organizational support, and we do want to shout out all the organizations that have really helped to bring this summit to life. But this day and this community was brought together by people who have spent their time and effort trying to get a group together that we know is large and that wants to be in community, that has legal needs. And that is part of what this collective aims to do. So thank you all for bearing with us as we navigate the technology. Huge shout out to Marika and Jake for assisting, being invaluable in assisting with the technology. Phyllis as well. Hawa, you saved the day for getting us together today using this Zoom platform. And we want to thank you all. Thank you to our wonderful presenters as well. Graham, I hope I'm not stepping on toes. I'm doing the sort of closing out. We had fabulous sessions. I know I recorded mine. I've got 3% that's downloading on my computer. If for some reason the recordings don't work, you can blame me and my old laptop. I apologize for that, but we are going to take these slides, the recordings, put them all onto the website. You will have your Zoom link. The Zoom link you have is your Zoom link. It's going to be the one that you use for the remainder of the summit. And Graham, do you want to share your screen so that you can show everyone?
I sure can. I'll do it right now. And I just so you know, the reason why I keep on taking myself off screen is I'm crying over here because I'm just so proud of the work that you all have done and then bringing everyone together. This is such an amazing group. Let me make this full screen. Can you all see that? So this is the map that is actually the most recent map that Jake just made for us of all the registrants. I believe it was Tristia just said over 640, I think, registrants from all across the country. You can see the wide diversity of where people are located, where people are calling in from. You know, this is if you'd like to take a screenshot, we can probably put this online somewhere because this is anonymous data. But this is pretty amazing. You can see how important this issue is across the country. You can see the dedication of people who took time out of their days, who took, you know, so many hours out of their lives to put this together, this summit together. We're just, you know, it's such an honor to work with you all. It's such an honor to be part of this collective. And you know, and one last thing, I just want to put the call out again. Please, if you can, attend tomorrow. We're going to have amazing conversations that are hosted by members of the Home on Wheels Alliance, by more parking program providers. Talking with Tim McCormick had mentioned he's going to be talking about housing as vehicles and vehicles as housing. We have just, it's going to be an amazing day tomorrow. Again, we're recording the sessions. We're going to be putting them online. Hopefully we'll be able to put them on YouTube too, so they can have a really wide reach. And you know, this work is for you all. We brought this together because we wanted to share the information, the work that you are doing, because we knew that others could learn from it and take it and do that great work that you're doing in their communities, because they don't know. They may not know that it's even possible. One of my favorite quotes is that possibility does not make reality, but in possibility lies reality. Just because something is possible doesn't make it true, but it cannot be true unless it's possible. And you all have made new things possible today. So I want to thank you so much for attending this session. I want to thank you for the amazing work that you do, each individually in your communities and now as part of this collective. And again, I invite you to join the collective at vehicleresidency.org. Again, it might take us a couple days to get to respond to everyone, so I apologize for any delays in that. But as we move forward into 2023, we are going to be building this collective into even a more stable organization that is self-sustaining. And we are looking for your help in leading that, in guiding that, and telling us the best ways to do that. We do this work because it's for all of us, and we want us all to be engaged. So again, thank you so much for everybody for attending. And I don't know, I'm just glowing with just amazing work you all are doing. Thank you. Thank you.